Hello guys, Stereo back on PS5 testing out mouse and keyboard again in Battlefield 6. I have sort of done this before on the channel. I quite enjoyed it. I think it's quite a decent enough experience in my opinion. And it's sort of like since the last video I've sort of gotten a lot more questions about it, and that's sort of the point of this video, you know, just to revisit it, give it a go again. Answer some of the questions I had before, and sort of a few things to mention, sort of some more observations, and sort of show some gameplay of a few games that I've had this week on sort of Cairo Bazaar. So this is all from the base PlayStation 5, you know, the sort of entry model, and it is just a case of just plugging in your mouse and keyboard into the PS5, so no like third-party devices to get it to work. It's sort of natively supported by the developers. I would recommend using the sort of two rear ports of the console, as these are the fastest USB ports. So if you can use them, particularly the mouse, I would recommend to do so. I was using an OP1 8K mouse, so make sure you set the mouse to 1K polling rate before, as you know, sort of using it on PS5 only supports up to about, I think it's about 1000 polling rate. Which even so from a sort of PC perspective, it's actually really nice. You know, it felt very fast, snappy aim. Playing it felt great. You know, it's definitely something you can get used to. Quite sort of equivalent to a PC, 100%. On the sort of keyboard side, I was using the Corsair K65 Pro Mini. I did have to set it to like PS5 compatibility mode to get it to work. So you just have to hold FN. You just have to hold FN and Windows key for like 5 seconds, and it sort of just sprung to life essentially. And then after that, just no problems at all. You know, I did get some comments with some people having sort of problems with like stuttering with their mice. I would say you need to check the sort of manufacturer's guide to help. You know, whatever mouse you got, go to Razer, you know, Endgame or whatever. You know, I would say actually probably just make sure your polling rate is set to the, you know, at least 1000, maximum 1000. Sorry. And yes, you know, so for my sort of, so what I've experienced, sort of no real input issues. You know, and as sort of a PC player, I'm quite good at picking up on input issues, FPS drops. You know, none of that I could speak of sort of input wise. FPS wise, I was using a performance mode in Battlefield 6. So on the base PS5 it has sort of two settings, you know, balanced and performance. Balance is like the sort of quality mode, sort of set to 60 FPS, and then the performance mode is more of sort of like lower resolution and sort of targets higher frame rates. And that's one I was using. I did actually have it set to 120 Hz mode, so 1080p 120 Hz essentially. And it was quite nice, I'm not gonna lie. If you have a compatible monitor, like, try it out for sure. It's really nice. One thing I did notice, it was 1080p, but definitely looked like there was sort of like some upscaling involved as well. So it might actually go lower than 1080p with like some kind of like dynamic scaling to maintain frame rate. You could sort of see it in the quality depth sometimes, you know, and as a player, you know, sort of play at 1080p, native 1080p, and higher, sort of 1440p nowadays in Battlefield 6. You can really see it, you know, and it's something to be aware of if you play at sort of higher resolution monitors and TVs. You know, when you are using performance mode, you know, you'll sort of notice that. But just something to mention. You know, FPS wise in performance mode, you know, at 120 Hz, sort of averages between like 90 and 120. So it's not a locked 120. Yes, I feel like you didn't really notice it. So I think to the vast majority of players, you probably wouldn't notice it. To be honest, I do think it's a decent enough experience for a console. You know, it is 6 years old now. You know, the latest current Battlefield game, you know, getting 90 to 120. You know, it's a good experience. You could get used to it, in my opinion. Something to mention is, and this is sort of reason for making a video, just to like clarifying a few. Something I've seen like elsewhere on the internet is sort of like the mentality of like mouse and keyboard on PS5 and Battlefield 6 is like some kind of cheating. Just to clarify again, you know, there's no third-party devices to get this to work. You know, it's a sort of feature of the game. They're supported by the developers' DICE, you know, for players to use. It's different times nowadays. You know, every FPS game comes out has crossplay. You can use controller on PC, you can use mouse and keyboard on console. It's all supported. You know, you are playing in crossplay servers, so you will be playing against players with different inputs on different consoles, PC, console, you know, it doesn't really matter. Do you know, maybe sort of like 10 years ago, you know, myself, I used to play on console controller, and, you know, mouse and keyboard, like these devices people used to use to try and get an advantage over, you know, only controller lobbies. You know, it was a bit frowned upon, you know, and it's not the same now. You know, it's like it's completely different times now. And then just to mention as well, you know, the reason why these people would use the devices, they would use the devices to get aim assist and get less recoil and all that. So that's another reason. That's why I would have ways. It's completely different. You know, that was a different time. They were, you know, it was frowned upon, understandably so. But, you know, nowadays, mouse and keyboard on console, you know, it's like there's nothing sketchy about it. It's all supported by developers, you know. So hopefully sort of clear that out, really. Just sort of moving on quite quickly, you know, talking about the different inputs. It was quite like a seamless experience. You know, you can sort of switch between the two whilst in game and in the menus. You sort of like you pick up a controller and the sort of game immediately recognizes it and changes the UI, changes it instantly. You know, you sort of touch your mouse and it basically becomes a PC like immediately. It's quite an experience to see. Do you know what I mean? I definitely sort of recommend it, giving it a go. And something else, actually, I've just had a thought. Something else to mention, I mentioned earlier, is, you know, when you do use mouse and keyboard, you do have no aim assist. So regardless of your controller settings, so it turns off when you use mouse and keyboard. So, you know, there is no aim assist when using mouse and keyboard. So a lot of controller players will be happy, understandably so. I know a lot of players are curious about it, so I'm very happy to say that it does in fact turn off when you do use mouse and keyboard on PS5. And I think, you know, to summarise, I think it's a good enough experience. You know, myself as a PC player, I'm quite prone to pick up on like FPS drops, input issues, you know, sort of resolution, whether it's the true resolution, whether there's like some dynamic scaling. I notice it on my PS5 a lot of games that they're not running at what they claim to be running at. Do you know what I mean? From what I've experienced, you know, I think it's a good enough experience. You know, like you're going to have a good time on this. You know, on PS5 Pro, I would say, you know, technically your experience is going to be a better experience. You know, more FPS, more sort of visual clarity, I would assume. You know, if you're sort of thinking about buying a PC or going into PC gaming, you know, PC gaming is not exactly cheap nowadays. You know, you can use your PS5 to get a taste out, or, you know, you could even main your PS5 for Battlefield 6 mouse and keyboard. You know, especially on a 120Hz monitor. You know, it's a good experience. I would say in comparison to like PC, it's, you know, it's not the same experience. You know, it's not going to be, you know, 1440p, 240Hz. You know, sort of high FPS. You know, like the latency is going to be a lot lower. You know, this is, you're not going to get that experience here at a PS5. I do think it's a good enough experience, but, you know, you're not going to get the experience of higher frame rates, higher hertz, you know, lower latency. You're not going to get that here. But I still think, you know, it's a good experience, and I definitely recommend people giving it a go. And all the gameplay in the background is all being on mouse and keyboard on PS5. I think I'll just leave you with the rest of this gameplay on mouse and keyboard on PS5. Hope you sort of cleared up a few things and sort of do a new observation, sort of help a few players out with a few things. Any questions, let me know in the comments. More than happy to answer. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already, be very much appreciated. And I'll see you boys in the next one.
area! Enemy close on now! Move it!